When you look at human progress in terms of invention, the fact that we are a species that invents generatively, we seem to be unstoppable inventors. That seems to be driven by people who have a lot of autistic traits, or maybe autism itself. So we maybe have underestimated the contribution that autistic people have made to human progress.
Simon Baron-Cohen, welcome to How the Light Gets In.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So you've spent much of your career trying to understand the mind through autism, empathy, systemizing, and brain development. Do you think that neuroscience, especially now you've been speaking about it today at How the Light Gets In, is genuinely explaining how the mind works, or is it still mostly mapping the physical traces of the thought?
So I guess another way of asking this question is, how much has neuroscience taught us? And I think we've probably made a lot of progress in neuroscience in certain areas. So we've learnt aspects of the human brain. We know, for example, where language is mostly processed in the human brain. We know the sensory areas of the brain. We can start to sort of map different functions in the brain. But I don't know that neuroscience is going to really help us understand human experience fully. So it's useful. All of science is useful, but currently there are quite a lot of limitations as to what neuroscience can help with.
Of course. And can you sort of give us an explanation of how autism can give us a route into that understanding? And does that offer a greater benefit to the limitations that we possibly have at the moment?
So autistic people, their brains develop differently. And there's a word that, lots of people are familiar with now called neurodiversity. The idea that all of our brains develop differently. In some sense, we are all neurodiverse, just as because we're all individuals. But if we looked at autistic people compared to non-autistic people, we see differences in how they process information, how their brains develop in childhood, even prenatally. So, and when I think about neurodiversity, I'm thinking both about disability, but also about difference. So sometimes the differences that we see, they add up to challenges that the person has, where we would perhaps make a diagnosis of a disability as a kind of stepping stone into getting support. But for many people, including many autistic people, they are just differences, and maybe part of the message of neurodiversity, it's kind of a new framework, is respect for difference and acceptance of difference. So we've moved right away from kind of the old view that there's a thing called the normal brain and a thing called the abnormal brain, all the stigmatizing and pathologizing language, towards this idea that there are just lots of different types of brains and we should show respect for difference.
And just one thing that I thought on top of that you draw on in The Pattern Seekers, you sort of talk about human invention depends on our ability to identify if and then patterns, and that this ability kind of overlaps with autistic traits quite a lot. Is autism, do you think, too often framed through what people lack, rather than a distinctive sort of cognitive strengths? And how has that changed in the last few years, do you think?
Yeah, I think for the longest time in autism research, we've focused on so-called deficits, and areas of disability. So the focus was on what autistic people struggle with, and the most extreme descriptions would be about what they can't do. I think these days we're kind of shifting the way we think about autism to focus on how do autistic people think differently, and focus not so much on deficits, but on things that autistic people not only can do, but sometimes do even better than non-autistic people. So that's almost like it's a sea change in how we think about autism. And in my book, the pattern seekers, what I argue there is that autistic people have a strong interest in patterns, not just any old patterns, but you mentioned specific patterns, if and then patterns, that if I take something and I do something to it, then I get a particular outcome. And that kind of fascination with these special patterns could be a great advantage in a lot of different fields. You could think about, for example, music. How can I take one input and transform it into a different output? Could be in mathematics, could be in art and in science and all sorts of areas. And it's not that only autistic people are interested in these patterns, because we all are to some extent. In the book, what I'm arguing is that in autism, this ability or drive to seek these special patterns may be tuned up particularly high. But we also see that in people who work in STEM, for example, science, technology, engineering, or maths, and who coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, also have many more autistic traits on average compared to people who don't work in STEM. So part of the thesis in that book is that when you look at human progress in terms of invention, the fact that we are a species that invents generatively, we seem to be unstoppable inventors, that seems to be driven by people who have a lot of autistic traits, or maybe autism itself. So we maybe have underestimated the contribution that autistic people have made to human progress.
And I think one thing to pull on there is some autistic people worry that sort of celebrating this if and them or special talents can create kind of a new stereotype where autistic people are valued only if they are sort of unusually balanced, like super mathematical and inventive. Is this a fair concern, or do you think that is taking something and running with the wind?
Yeah, I think it is a fair concern. I mean, I think human value belongs to all of us. It doesn't really matter whether you've got a diagnosis or not. We should all have equal human value. So we shouldn't sort of stereotype. We shouldn't prejudge somebody's value based on, for example, how well they perform on a particular task. And back in 2017, on Autism Awareness Day, I was invited by the United Nations to talk about autism and human rights. Because actually, for the longest time in the history of autism, I would say autistic people have missed out on basic human rights. And these stereotypes often contribute to a violation of their human rights. So, people are people. Everybody should be treated equally. But, in the book, in The Pattern Seekers, I'm also saying let's not overlook some of the remarkable aspects of autism. And this isn't just people who've achieved, public recognition. It might even be amongst people who are autistic and with a learning disability, but let's just let them show their potential in their own right.
One other stereotype that I think comes out from your discussions and what I've listened to and in your book is the concept of empathy around autistic people.
Yeah.
Do you think the public discussion still misunderstands the difference between struggling to read another person's thoughts and sort of have an interaction and actually lacking care for them?
Yeah.
And how does that manifest?
Yeah, now, that's a really important question, because I think there are misunderstandings about autism and empathy. So in our own work, in my work, what the data seems to be showing is that whilst autistic people may struggle to recognize or imagine another person's thoughts and feelings, once they're pointed out to them, they care about them. They're not sort of emotionally detached. So if they hear that, for example, a person is suffering or in distress or has been treated unjustly, that upsets them and they want to go and help. They want to alleviate other people's distress. They may even become whistleblowers at work when they see injustice. So autistic people clearly have empathy, but we distinguish between cognitive empathy, which is the recognition part, where the person may just need a bit of help to draw those inferences, and affective empathy, which is how does it make you feel once you know what the person is going through. Autistic people seem to be very empathic when it comes to the affective side, how it makes them feel. In that way, they're not like psychopaths, for example, who may be very uncaring.
Do you think a lot of the conflict in this area comes from the language that we use, as opposed to there naturally actually being conflict?
I think language contributes to the misunderstandings. If you take a word like empathy, it sounds like it's just a single thing, but actually what the neuroscience and the psychological research is showing is that empathy itself is a bit of an umbrella concept, and you can break it down into different kinds of empathy. Mm-hmm. So very important that we don't sort of generalize too quickly or draw conclusions that are too simplistic.
On the same sort of idea of language, do you think the language of female and male brains has helped public understanding, or has it sometimes obscured the science and been disadvantaged to the individuals who have differences within the gender?
Yeah, so gender differences and sex differences, that kind of research, it always starts with putting people into groups. Mm. So these people either identify as female or male, or were assigned this gender at birth. You put people into two groups, and then what the scientists do is that they tend to look for average differences between these two groups. But average differences don't apply to every individual in this group or that group. So I think you're right that the headlines, even the sort of the titles of debates in festivals or books or whatever, implying that there's a male brain and a female brain, that's totally misleading. What the science shows is that there's huge overlap between groups. You can see differences at the average, but you can find individuals in one group who are not typical for their group, and the same in the other group. And of course, these days, we don't just think in terms of a binary comparison. The whole sort of field of gender non-binary self-identification and the research that's going into that is suggesting it's much more complex. And ultimately, again, it comes back to this human rights issue. We were talking earlier about autistic people's human rights, but it's all of our human rights to just be ourselves and be accepted for who we are. Mm-hmm.
I think the one final point, just continue with this idea of male and female language, autistic women and girls have often been underdiagnosed. Do you think there is a risk that the idea of the male brain framing, which, as you've said, potentially is not the most useful idea to move forward with, makes autism much harder to recognise within women? And how can we actually go about making a difference there?
Yeah. So I think you're right that autism has been under-recognised in females, in girls and in women. But why has it been under-recognised? Is it to do with theories that come and go? Or is it to do with maybe wider social pressures? So, for example, I think in many cultures, there's an expectation that girls will be sociable and communicative and enjoy being in small groups or even larger groups and interacting and socializing. And that if you're autistic and you're growing up in a culture with those sorts of expectations, it may lead to what's called masking or camouflaging, where you try your best to fit in and try to conform to these cultural expectations. But I think the research increasingly is suggesting that if we end up masking and camouflaging, what's that doing to our mental health? So for a lot of autistic girls and women, we may see higher rates of poor mental health because they're not free to just be themselves.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to How the Light Gets In.
Thanks for the chat.